Hello everyone, my name is Marcus and this is another Warmane video. This is the second part to my warrior guide that I'm making this year, and this is an update on the 2015 guide I made, well, 5 years ago. This part is about talents and glyphs, the next part is about macros. The first part was about gems, gear and enchantments, so if you'd like to watch that, I'll leave a link in the video description below. Let's not waste any more time. The first talent you want to look at is, of course, arms. We use a combination of 57 points in arms and 14 in fury and 0 in protection. Pretty much every warrior uses this number combination. There are some slight differences in the combinations that people use, and I will talk about that. Let's go through the list of talents and let's talk about the most important ones. So, if you go on the armory and you search for my character and you search for top-rated warriors, I'm not a top-rated warrior technically speaking, even though some people for some reason seem to think I am, but you'll be able to see the list of talents that they have and you can read them for yourself. So I'm not going to waste your time and read every single one because that would take quite a while. Instead, I'm going to talk about the ones you need to think about the most. So the first one to look at is Taste for Blood. Whenever your rend ability causes damage, you have a 100% chance of allowing the use of your Overpower ability for 9 seconds. The importance of this is when you use rend, you can use Overpower. You get an Overpower proc maximum every 6 seconds. Overpower with improved Overpower does have a very high critical chance, so it pretty much crits all the time. So Overpower procs are really useful, which is why you need to use Taste for Blood, in my opinion. Now, this requires us to go down the list a little bit, but what's connected to this is a talent called Unrelenting Assault. It reduces the cooldown of your Overpower and Revenge abilities by 4 seconds, so this means Overpower you can use every second, technically speaking, that's the cooldown, and increases the damage done by both abilities by 20%. This is the important part. If you strike a player with Overpower while they are casting, their magical damage and healing will be reduced by 50% for 6 seconds. In combination with Mortal Strike, which as you may know reduces healing by 50%, you can use this on a Holy Paladin and make them heal really little. You can use this on a Warlock who, for example, is casting Chaos Bolt, and that will do 50% less damage. So having improved Overpower, Unrelenting Assault, this talent here, and Taste for Blood, you have Overpower available very often, which means you have more opportunities to take advantage of Unrelenting Assault, to use Overpower while someone is casting. It's very powerful and very useful, and why I wanted to highlight it. The next talent I wanted to highlight is Weapon Specialization. There are 3 weapon specializations. There's Poleaxe, there is Mace Specialization, and Sword Specialization. I'm not going to waste too much time and I'm going to tell you the truth, and that is Poleaxe Specialization is better. So Mace Specialization is quite nice. Your attacks with maces ignore up to 15% of your opponent's armor, assuming you do 5 out of 5, which you should be doing. Sword Specialization gives you a 10% chance to get an extra attack on the same target, so this is like a small chance to do a nice bit of burst. It's it's not bad. But it's not that these ones are bad, it's just that Poleaxe Specialization is better. It increases your chance to get a critical strike and a critical damage by 5% if you use an axe or a polearm. So this includes weapons like Oathbinder, Charge of the Ranger General, which already give you loads of crit as a warrior because you have agility. So this just does more damage. I want to go up the talent tree a little bit and talk about Tactical Mastery. When you change stances, you retain extra 15 points of rage. Why is that useful? Well, changing stance can be quite punishing for your rage. You may not be able to burst as much, use as many abilities, so with Tactical Mastery, you have that extra rage, you can keep doing damage, you can keep casting spells. That's why it's vital. The next one I wanted to look at is Second Wind. When you are struck by a stun or an immobilize effect, so this can mean a kidney shot from a rogue, Hammer of Justice from a paladin, you can get frozen by a frost mage, all of these will trigger Second Wind. You generate 20 rage, so you can use abilities after you're stunned or after you are immobilized. And you also heal for 10% of your total health over 10 seconds. So if you are stun locked by a rogue, you have this little extra heal that helps to keep you alive. This is vital. I would never go without it. Let's talk about Mortal Strike. Mortal Strike reduces the effectiveness of any healing by 50% for 10 seconds. The importance of this is pretty substantial. If you heal 50% less, so half, so instead of healing 6,000, you heal 3,000. Instead of healing 2,000, you heal 1,000. Instead of healing 1,000, you heal 500. Mortal Strike's effect is so important for an arms warrior. You really need to make sure that your target, the one you want to kill, has Mortal Strike on them. So it is more difficult to heal them. It is easier for you to apply pressure and use something like Bladestorm to really make it hurt, as long as they have healing reduction on them. You always want to make sure that you control where you put your Mortal Strike. You don't just use it randomly for damage, even though, of course, it does do a lot of damage. But it's the effect itself, paired with abilities like Bladestorm, Overpower, which you should be using a lot, which gives you that extra edge, that extra advantage that you otherwise wouldn't have if you don't use it. This is why also I said in my previous video about hit rating, that if you don't have enough hit rating and you miss a Mortal Strike, that's really problematic. It can basically mean the difference between you killing your target and not killing them. So again, Mortal Strike is vital. The next talent I wanted to look at is Juggernaut. Juggernaut allows you to use charge in combat. Your next slam or Mortal Strike, so okay, we don't use slam as an arms warrior, but your next Mortal Strike has an additional 25% chance to critically hit if used within 10 seconds. So this gives you an opportunity to just slap them with a nice Mortal Strike crit, because 25% extra, I mean, you have a very good chance of getting a crit like that. That's quite useful, but the main reason you want this, and I would still use this if that effect wasn't there, is the fact that you can use charge in combat. If you can't use charge in combat, then you only have intercept or intervene. And they're useful, but having the extra gap closer, being able to go to your target very quickly, like a ranged DPS or a hunter or a mage, it's very useful. And really you need to be using this talent. There's really no reason why you shouldn't be using it, because it's just one talent point. So I wanted to highlight two talents now, and that's Sudden Death and Improved Hamstring. People choose one or the other. People typically choose Sudden Death. This means that your melee hits have a 9% chance of allowing the use of Execute regardless of the target's health state. In addition, you keep at least 10 rage after using Execute. So if you want to spam Execute on a target, you don't run out of rage, and you also can use it as extra burst. That's very useful, of course. And it also means that you don't lose all of your rage if you want to spam Execute. Improved Hamstring, on the other hand, gives you a chance to immobilize your target. If you do 3 out of 3 for Improved Hamstring, that percentage is 15%. Against a mage, against a priest, against a ranged DPS, locking them into place is really very nice. But not everyone uses it. Warmane has a lot of people who wear plate, so keeping a warrior locked down, it's useful, but it's not as important as possibly doing more damage. You can also use this in conjunction with the Glyph of Hamstring to have an extra high chance of locking people down, immobilizing them for 5 seconds. What I suggest is try one or the other, see what you like, see what is most useful, but I will say most people use Sudden Death. The next one I wanted to highlight is Wrecking Crew. Your melee critical hits enrage you, increasing all damage caused by 10% for 12 seconds. So, what does this mean? Enrage is needed to use Enraged Regeneration. If you're enraged all the time, you do 10% more damage, but you can also use Enraged Regeneration whenever you want, assuming you're not stunned. So this is very important. Of course, the extra damage is vital, but being able to use Enraged Regeneration at any point in time, if you're not stunned, is the difference between life and death in an arena or a BG. So that's why I wanted to highlight it. And lastly, on the Arms Warrior tree is Bladestorm. Now again, for people who have played Wrath of the Lich King Warriors, they understand Bladestorm. It's what people call, they say, spin to win. It's not just a damage dealer, it's also a CC remover. It's not the same thing as using your medallion or trinket or the human racial, but it also stops control abilities from being used against you. So for example, a polymorph, an immobilize effect, or a stun from a paladin like Hammer of Justice, kidney shot, cheap shot, these things like that. It's very useful at actually removing some pressure on you. So it can be used defensively, but of course, in an ideal world, you use it offensively. You use it when your target has Mortal Strike, they don't have a lot of defensive cooldowns, and that will allow you to maximize the amount of damage you do. It's also good at dealing with pets, so hunter pets, warlock pets. It's quite good at getting rid of them quite quickly. And you can use this in combination with a spell like Sweeping Strikes to do even more AoE damage. Obviously, you need to get it. I don't even think I need to say that you need to get Bladestorm, but yeah, you should get Bladestorm. Now let's look at the Fury talent tree. There are, of course, 14 talent points on the Fury tree, so there's not as much to talk about. But the thing I wanted to highlight is Booming Voice. Booming Voice increases the area of effect and duration of your Battle Shout, Demoralizing Shout, and Commanding Shout by 50%. You might look at this and think, well, that's not very important. Well, actually, Demoralizing Shout can be used to get rogues out of stealth. It can be used to get druids out of stealth. So if that has extra range, it's actually very useful at dealing with rogues. So really, you should get this, especially if rogues give you a problem. And if you're an arms warrior, rogues do give you a problem. This is Piercing Howl. It reduces the movement speed of players within 10 yards by 50% for 6 seconds. It's good at keeping mages closer to you. It's even good at keeping certain distances between particular, for example, warriors. If you want to stay away from them, if you have to use your defensive cooldowns, you could just slow and stop them from going to you. So Piercing Howl is, again, I consider this to be very important because being able to constantly slow people is useful. You can also use this in conjunction with Hamstring to keep them even slower. Now let's talk about glyphs. Minor glyphs are pretty simple to understand. There are 3 that you want to use and nothing else, and that's Glyph of Blood Rage. So that means that Blood Rage doesn't take HP away from you, so that's pretty obvious. Then you have Glyph of Battle or Glyph of Command. You'd probably want to use Glyph of Battle because it increases the duration of your Battle Shout, and you're a warrior, so you want more damage. And lastly, very importantly, is Glyph of Charge. Glyph of Charge increases the range of your charge ability by 5 yards. So if you want to get closer to a priest, a mage, a hunter, that extra range is very useful. And again, you need it. The choice of minor glyphs is really not that difficult. There aren't that many good choices. What becomes more difficult is when you look at major glyphs. Luckily, major glyphs have one obvious choice, and that's Glyph of Mortal Strike. Mortal Strike is a key ability, so 10% extra damage is pretty obvious, you want to use it. The other 2 are not so clear. I actually consider 2 options out of the last 2, and that's either Rending and Overpower, so Glyph of Rending, Glyph of Overpower, or Glyph of Sweeping Strikes and Glyph of Bladestorm. This is basically like the single target or the multi-target option. So Rending and Overpower is quite good for single target, so Rend lasts longer, so it lasts an extra 6 seconds. That means 2 things. First of all, it's good against rogues because it keeps them in combat, but also it gives you, during that time, extra Overpower procs. Glyph of Overpower makes it so that Overpower is triggered by parrying. So it's great against hunters, it's good against Death Knights, and that means you can spam the living hell out of Overpower, and it's available more often. So it's very, very good for single target. It also means that you can take advantage of Unrelenting Assault more often. So you can, when you use Overpower and the person is casting, it reduces healing by 50%. As I've explained before, it's very important and very useful. Now, if I was doing just arenas, I probably would use this, but because I do a bit of everything, I do battlegrounds, I do world PvP, I actually use a different combination of glyphs, and that's Sweeping Strikes and Bladestorm. Glyph of Sweeping Strikes means that Sweeping Strikes doesn't cost any rage. This means you can actually start with Sweeping Strikes because it doesn't cost any rage. And Glyph of Bladestorm reduces the cooldown of Bladestorm by 15 seconds. This is great at killing a Warlock's pet in arenas, and of course, these are multi-target AoE abilities that we're talking about, so it's good for BGs when there are more people. And again, as I said, it's quite good against things like Warlocks, Priests, because you can use Bladestorm more often. And as I said, in particular with Warlocks, the pets can die quite quickly if you use this combination of spells. If your equipment isn't so good, isn't so high, then you might actually want to consider using Glyph of Execution instead of one of the ones I talked about. Glyph of Execution means that your execute ability does damage as if you have 10 extra rage. Basically, this means execute does more damage. Because execute is a fixed amount of damage, it's very good if you're lower geared. But if you're best in slot, fixed amounts of damage aren't very useful. It's better to have weapon damage, like Mortal Strike, for example, because that scales with the damage that you actually do. So something to think about, something to consider. As a best in slot warrior, I wouldn't use Glyph of Execution personally, but I have seen some different opinions about it. My advice is to try and see what you like, because this is what everyone else uses, but you might just not like it. So see what works for you. But at some point, I would suggest at least using some of these, because the combinations of abilities like Sweeping Strikes and Bladestorm is very useful. Rend and Overpower work very well together, because Rend causes Overpower, and being able to spam Overpower is very, very powerful, as I said. See what you like and try different things. The next video in this series is going to be about macros. It should be out by next week, fingers crossed. That might take a little bit of time to make. But anyway, I hope you found this part enjoyable and informative. If you'd like to see how to equip your warrior with the right gear, gems, and enchantments, the first part of this video is linked in the video description. If you've enjoyed this video, I please suggest you leave a like. You can subscribe to my channel if you'd like to be notified of any future content, and I stream every Thursday at 10 PM Central European Time. Anyway, my name is Markix, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.